Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Once again, thank you for joining us for our mayoral candidates conversation this morning with Eric Adams. You know, this is the fourth Friday morning in a series of many Fridays that we're happy to provide our members, our ABNY family, with the opportunity to hear directly from candidates and learn more about their policy platforms and ideas to keep New York City moving forward. We're quickly approaching the 2021 mayoral primary election season, and this upcoming election is perhaps the most consequential mayoral race in the city's history. You know, our city is fighting to recover from the unprecedented intersection of a health emergency, economic crisis, and socioeconomic unrest sparked by racial injustice across the country. And now more than ever, it is important for us here at ABNY to think about how we can not only serve our members, but serve the city of New York, the city we love so much. So that is why we are proud to offer this forum here today, so you can directly hear from the candidates, the mayoral candidates, as we strategize and think about how the city should move forward and how we move forward together. And today, I'm excited to welcome Eric Adams, one of the first to officially enter the mayor's race, announcing in November of last year. Eric has hit the campaign trail with a clear vision for the city of New York and its future. As a New York City police officer, Eric helped found 100 Blacks in law enforcement who care, and was a highly visible critic of the policing policies during both Giuliani and Bloomberg administration. He believes the city cannot lower crime without a greater trust in police, focusing on police increasing new technologies, better relations in communities, and better organizations with clear objectives. Also, early in his term as borough president, Eric earned the reputation as a champion for development. So there's no surprise that his campaign and his platform has really focused on economic recovery, emphasizing on the importance of keeping businesses open and employees working by providing tax relief, creating more jobs, and attracting new companies to the city like life sciences industry. More recently, is focused on health issues, tapping into his past health experiences to advocate for public measures to support the consumption of plant-based foods. We know that the borough president takes this very seriously, and also being an advocate for quality healthcare and healthy food in communities, especially in schools. Eric also believes that there's a need to protect public health, undo deep racial health disparities, and reduce inequalities by increasing services. He has proposed a color-coded vaccination program to reach herd immunity and get vulnerable New Yorkers vaccinated. And we need that more now than ever as we look to reopen the city as quickly as possible. And also, he talks about sending community health workers directly into communities, increasing telehealth services, and putting COVID care centers in NYCHA housing. More importantly, he believes the city's next mayor needs to be a better manager, and he believes he is that manager. We look forward to hearing more about this and more about his platform this morning during the fourth mayoral conversation series here at ABNY. ABNY members, please join me in welcoming Eric Adams. Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoy seeing everyone this morning. And, first I want to really get out of the way a thank you. Many of your members are part of really the foundation of this city. When you think about all of the criticisms that have been pointed towards our corporations, our companies, our high income earners. I don't share that response. I believe we are in this together, and it is imperative that we acknowledge the role that we all play. When you look at the fact that 65,000 New Yorkers pay 51% of our income tax, and they are only 2% of income tax filers. I am not like those who say we don't care if they leave or not. I'm just the opposite. I am saying, let's stay here. Let's work through this together, because not only do you visit the theaters and use discretionary spending in our restaurants and invest in our corporations, but you do something else that is often overlooked. We have 35,000 nonprofits in this city with 600,000 employees. $33 billion in economic income come from payrolls. The dollars that we receive in those nonprofits, much of those dollars come from you, such as the Robin Hood foundations and other foundations that come together and receive your donations. And so you are part of New York. And if people have not stated it, let me say thank you for being there, and please remain here so we can continue to grow this city, particularly during these difficult times. I want to also say thank you and good morning to my good friend Stephen and the entire ABNY team. You folks are amazing what you do, and I love speaking with you because you have one goal, and it's the same goal I have, to make New York better. So thank you for all the important work that the team is doing. And when you think about it, it was almost a little more than a year ago, just before COVID-19 struck, I spoke to you about my concerns for our city. And we're at a moment that I tell the story often, and some of you may have heard it. We're at the moment that's similar to when I dropped Jordan, my son, off to school. It was the first time he was going away. Jordan was 18 at the time. I dropped him off to American University, and I questioned the head of the school for about 20 minutes before he looked at me and placed his hands on my shoulders. And he stated that, Eric, I just dropped my daughter off to Carolina. And I knew that he understood what I was feeling. I was going through separation anxiety and uncertainty of losing my baby to an institution. And I was not going to turn him over to someone that did not understand how much I have invested in him. And I say to you, Abney, I get it. I get it that you are watching our cities slowly decline to violence, to crime. You're watching a street that you pass by one day and the next day you're hearing of a stabbing of some person who's dealing with mental health illness that never received the support they deserve, assault someone. I get it that you're watching people inject themselves with heroin right in front of the schools of your children. I get it that we're seeing homelessness out of control. I get it that we're seeing the lack of clean streets, graffiti is everywhere. I get it, and I understand that. And I said back then, when I met with you, that our city was dysfunctional, and we have to acknowledge that we've governed from crisis to crisis. That is what we do. That this dysfunction had led to deep racial inequities, and that the inequality and crisis will only get worse unless we address the underlying dysfunction of our city. I spoke about how we let crises escalate to disasters. Now, here we are, 1 year later, 30,000 New Yorkers dead from COVID, 500,000 unemployed. Our crisis has become an unthinkable disaster. And who suffered the most? Blacks, Latinos, immigrants, low-income New Yorkers. Why, you would ask? Well, before the pandemic, we had let our dysfunctionality, the ineffectiveness and efficiencies of our local government create the inequalities in everything from healthcare to quality of life, to food options, to education, all of which directly led to the lower income communities of color dying at 3 times the rate of wealthier white New Yorkers. This is unacceptable. My friends, as I warned last year, the patient was on life support. So of course, then the body, our city, was ravaged by the disease. Last year, I also talked about how the city government was so dysfunctional that it was in conflict with itself every day. Agencies operate at cross purposes. They exist in silos. Not only do they not share information, they do not even share the same mission. I quoted my good friend Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river instead of going upstream to keep them from falling in the first place. Now the river is full of lost souls, and our dysfunctional government is not only keeping more from falling in, but failing to rescue those who are barely keeping their heads above water. That is why today, as I run for mayor, I'm still pushing for the same overhaul of our city government and an immediate transition to a real-time governing model, but with every agency and every group involved. But we must do this with a greater urgency. We simply cannot govern from crisis to crisis any longer. We have to once and for all use data, technology, and clear goals to get us out of this mess. It is a critical moment for our city, and you will all understand how important it is. And most importantly, you are critical and key to its recovery. So I'm glad we can talk about how to do that today. In sum, yes, New York is facing in its historic crises, but COVID is just one part. The virus has accelerated the other existing crises I warned about last year: the inequality, inefficiency, and even identity of our city. I believe we can overcome all of these crises, but the next mayor must have a serious plan and the conviction to follow through on it while uniting New Yorkers around it. Bold steps and strong leadership are needed to both recover from COVID, address these challenges, and correct the problems that existed before the pandemic. But let me be clear, we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this together. How do I know that? When I hear people say in the city that we are dead and that won't recover, to me, it's deja vu. As I mentioned last year, I was there and on the ground as a police officer in the mid-'80s and '90s when we were experiencing 2,000 homicides a year. To address the public safety crisis, visionaries in the NYPD pulled together a team to create the first version of an innovative real-time crime fighting tool, and I was part of that team. With that approach, we turned around crime in the direction of the city. We have to do that again, but with all aspects of city government. So we start our turnaround by identifying how exactly our city is dysfunctional. Here's a perfect example. At the beginning of the pandemic, City Hall slashed the capital budget for the housing and infrastructure instead of trimming the fat from agencies. They recently reinstituted part of the capital plan, but we lost nearly a year of good paying jobs that also would have made our city more sustainable and affordable. We also saw the dysfunction when the city and state failed to reach out to communities of color and immigrant communities about COVID, allowing it to spread with devastating effect. And now again, they are failing to vaccinate those same communities against the virus, even vaccinating out-of-towners at a high rate while they miss Black and brown communities in the outer boroughs. They refuse to go to a real-time vaccination system that we requested several times over and over again using handheld devices so we can correct the course when we're moving in the wrong direction. And this level of indifference is personal to me because I grew up in a New York City that also failed families like mine. When my brothers and I left for school in the morning in South Jamaica, Queens, we brought trash bags full of clothing because we didn't know if we would return home to City Marshal evicting our family. My mom did not want us to be humiliated by not having a change of clothing. We didn't know day to day if there would be food on the table for dinner. We depended on neighbors and the ladies from churches for basic things. We're better than that as a city. The city didn't help. The city never helped. And my mother deserved better. She worked her fingers to the bone, yet we were forced to depend on kindness and community to get through. That was more than 40 years ago, and the problems and struggles are still the same for millions of working people. At the same time, we have rising crime, massive unemployment, and the higher quality of life we have worked so hard to attain is slipping away. We're at risk of losing the New York we built and invested in. So we have to get to the city the right time and the right place to do the right thing. I like to say we must get this city into fighting shape. And here's my plan. I'll shift us to the real-time government model where all agencies operate on the same platform and report data daily as part of a scoring model like the City Score initiative in Boston. I met with the designer of that system, and we're going to tap into his expertise here. I'll also appoint an efficiency czar to trim agency budgets 3 to 5% across the board and find savings in our contracts. There is fat in the budgets of our agencies. I'll do an audit of the city's real estate portfolio to find property we can sell and leases we can suspend. And I'll save billions through attrition, non-essential workers, just like Michael Bloomberg did after the financial crisis. And when we make government more efficient, when we can invest in what makes it safe, livable, and enjoyable, we will have a better city. My government cost savings and new revenue will save or raise us between $5 and $6 billion in the first year. That should be enough to close the projected deficit and leave enough left to invest in New Yorkers. And I want to start with those who are struggling the most. This week, I announced my new Nyc Aid Plan to take an existing program that earned income tax credit and boost it significantly for those households earning less than $50,000. I would then prepay their next year's tax credit in monthly installments. And I don't want to wait until I'm mayor to get this done because people need cash in their pockets right now. A group of council members are already supporting New York City Aid and would push for the program to launch this year. The benefit to working class and lower income New Yorkers would be substantial. Under Nyc Aid, a family of 4 would receive $3,000 out in monthly payments of $250, starting immediately. And that is crucial to this recovery. That's 12 times what they receive now. I have also proposed a universal child care plan, which will ensure that every parent who needs child care will receive it. Today, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, and women of color in particular, are unable to break into the middle class simply because they cannot find a safe, accessible, affordable daycare provider to place their child with for the day. And children often do not get the tools they need to have the best chance of success. That is why my administration will provide child care to every New Yorker who needs it. Not only would this be an immediate economic stimulus for our lower income and middle income parents at a time when they desperately need it, but would also set our children on a better path to success. So I will provide universal child care by prioritizing space in city-owned buildings for child care, expanding the city's child tax credit to help pay for care, providing density bonuses to residential building developers who guarantee permanently free or low rents to providers, offering a tax break to office building owners and other private building owners who create free space for providers, eliminating the commercial rent tax for child care providers, creating a shared inventory of city contracted and private child care spots, dropping city permit costs for after school and other child care programs as city builders, and locking in affordable leases through the city for child care and open storefronts. New York City Aid and universal child care are 2 parts of my 3-part People's Plan for working class and lower income New Yorkers. And I'm announcing the 3rd leg of the plan today. And I'm really proud of this. I call it my city. To me, the most frustrating part of the city's dysfunction is that it fails to deliver existing services to the people who qualify for them. Worst of all, bureaucracy and red tape keep New Yorkers from accessing federal and state benefits, leaving billions of dollars on the table. It is a full-time job to be poor in New York. Families in need have to spend hours dealing with multiple agencies, all just to prove again and again that they deserve benefits. Government inefficiency is the dumbest and most unacceptable reason for failing New Yorkers in need during a dual health and economic crisis. So my city plan will connect New Yorkers to the services they qualify for by utilizing technology and prioritizing service delivery by bringing these benefits directly to the communities that need them, rather than waiting for New Yorkers to come to the city, which is often a challenge. Right now, a New Yorker qualifying for government benefits, including SNAP, Section 8, WIC, and cash assistance, spends on average 13 hours just signing up for benefits. And this is according to the Hunger Free America report. This includes 4 different interviews at 3 different agencies during the work week when government offices are open. Crisis is not a 9-to-5 problem. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week problem. So most people, poor people, actually miss work and lose pay just to qualify for help. How does this make sense? They also have to spend many hours completing multiple applications, online verification, and speaking with various agencies by phone. Imagine if English is your second language, how challenging and difficult this must be. And those who qualify must then continually recertify their eligibility. Incredibly, there are separate applications for many of these benefits that require separate forms, interviews, and follow-ups, even though they require the same exact documentation and qualification as each other. You would not run your businesses like this, so why the heck are we running our city like this? The average New York applicant for public assistance provides the same 5 pieces of documentation 7 times. More than half of public assistance programs require the exact same personal identification documentation. So my city plan will streamline and simplify the benefit process by creating one online portal with a universal application and verification process so that New Yorkers can qualify for multiple benefits at the same time, combining all city agencies' data onto one universal platform so that any agency can assist any New Yorker with any benefit. We will bring the city to the community by equipping city workers with computer tablets that are connected to the city's unified digital platform and sending them into the areas with the greatest need for city services, setting up shop in open storefronts, NYC complexes, and even parks. Meeting people where they are is at the heart of how we're going to get through this crisis. And coordinating the delivery of services, food, health, unemployment, housing, public assistance. We're coordinated across both government agencies and nonprofit groups through real-time reporting and a unified dashboard. The city's Access HRA site was supposed to take care of some of these goals, but since the pandemic began, there have been multiple reports of its crashing and long waits on 311, and with agencies to access benefits waiting over and over again for long periods of time. My city will replace all that. Aside from benefits access, my city will also create a single portal for access to all city agencies and functions. Everything from updating a business license to filing paperwork with the Department of Buildings. And each New Yorker will have a unique online account linked to their city ID card, which could be issued with a chip to New Yorkers who request one. Once enabled, the card would then provide a secure, contactless method of interacting with any city office or official. There are big ideas, as you see. We have a strong belief that it is going to take big ideas. And big ideas like these are important to change how we move in this city and face our challenges. To get all this done, the city needs a unifier who can rally us all together. We need someone who has lived the life of the people who need help right now, who prioritizes working people, not just because they deserve it, but because we cannot rebuild this city from the top down. It must be from the bottom up. We need someone who is trusted by AMNI members and trusted by NYCHA residents, someone who leads by example. That is why I slept at Borough Hall during the height of the crisis last year. That's why I put a mattress on the floor and woke up every morning to respond to the needs of people. This is the same thing I did as a police officer when terrorists struck our city. I slept in the precinct night after night to respond to the calls of New Yorkers. We were unsure when the next terrorist threat would come to our city. We wanted to be prepared. It is why I personally delivered hundreds of thousands of masks and meals to lower income communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic. When others fled, I led. I stayed here, taking action. But you don't just need to lead. You also must have a plan. That's why I spent the last 2.5 years meeting with more than 200 smart people in government, business, education, and healthcare. Some of you may be on this Zoom today. The result of those meetings is in my 100 Steps Forward for New York document with 106 policy proposals to fix our government, jumpstart our economy, and make New York safer and more affordable. That is what we need right now. Someone who understands New York and how to fix it. But let me also tell you what New Yorkers do not need right now. We do not need empty promises from hollow salesmen. Too much is at stake. People of color and working people have been lied to again and again by salesmen who do not understand our struggle or do not care about it. It is always the same. When there is an election, salesmen come into our neighborhoods trying to buy votes with promises. They weren't there when the pipes froze at NYCHA complex. They weren't there when the innocent young man was shot by police or by a gangbanger. They weren't there to fight for workers' rights. They weren't there when crime was high and our streets were unsafe. They didn't organize the marches. They didn't whip the votes. They didn't comfort the families whose baby wasn't coming home. They were not engaged with everyday New Yorkers from one end of the spectrum to the next. There are a lot of quality people running for mayor. Some have very good ideas, and I would say most deeply care about this city. But some have false promises, like forcibly selling a UBI. We all know that's a UB lie. The idea of universal basic income as envisioned by Martin Luther King Jr. is an income guarantee to all by the federal government through either a good job or the amount needed to exist poverty and become part of the middle class, to exit poverty and become part of the middle class. Dr. King said, we must create full employment, or we must create incomes. New forms of work that enhance the social good will have to be devised for those whom traditional jobs are not available. A forced plan with false promises that state you'll give $2,000 a year to 500,000 New Yorkers is just snake oil. It does not sound like a multi-class income to you, does it? Does that sound universal to you? It does not to me. Lying to low-income New Yorkers right now is cruel and it's wrong. We don't need salesmen. We need leaders. We need serious plans and honest leadership. That is why I am so focused on making government work better. Yes, people do need money in their pockets, and that is why I propose the New York City Aid. But they also need easier access to the benefits and programs they deserve: childcare, affordable housing, access to vaccines and healthcare and jobs. And more than anything, they need to be seen and heard. They need our city to revolve around them. Our city has never had a blue collar mayor who's a person of color. And I think it's never needed, has never been needed more than now. The last blue collar mayor we had was LaGuardia. It's time to revisit that strong past. The same challenges I dealt with as a young man in South Jamaica, Queens, are the same challenges people are dealing with today in neighborhoods exactly like the one my mom raised me in. And I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to get us back on track. and I'm ready to deliver for all New Yorkers because I will never give up on New York. And I will always tell New Yorkers the truth. Our people are too hardworking and too proud for anything less. Given a purpose and real leadership, they can do anything. So I know we must get to work. And when I spoke with you, Abney, almost a year ago, I ended with the same thing I'm going to end with today. I wore a bulletproof vest for 22 years, and I stood on street corners and I protected the children and families of our city. That young man I called Jordan that I dropped off to college, I promise you, he would not grow up in the city that I grew up in, filled with crime, danger, uncertainty. New York City is not going backwards. It doesn't matter if it's when I'm wearing a blue uniform or a blue suit. This is the city I love. I'm a child of New York City, and I will protect it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Thank you for that. We're grateful, and we have a bunch of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yes, it is.
And I'll say if people want to put questions in the chat, please do, and so we can get to them as well. I guess I'd start with just a specific question about my city. You talked about meeting people where they are. There's such a digital divide in our town that I wonder, can the people who most need to access that platform, do they have the technology to do it? And we see that we are hundreds of thousands of tablets short for our public school system for our kids, which is tragic. And I would say can you talk a bit like how we meet that community there so they can access those services better?
Well, one important area for us, you're right, there are two challenges. One, there is a technology gap. Second, we have language barriers. What we must do is reimagine our educational system and allow our educational experience not to be limited to a classroom. Allowing our children to experience civic engagement, intergenerational educational experiences, allowing young people to go into their communities and educate from senior centers to other locations of how to use some of the new technology to access these benefits. And remember, once you sign up one time for My City, you are not going to repeatedly have to do it. We'll be dealing with one data platform, and then do something that Abney was extremely helpful in putting in place. We failed to mobilize the organizations that were part of the census outreach. They understand a multitude of different languages and cultures. We need to re-engage these census outreach workers, not every 10 years, but every day. They are able to go into the crevices of these various communities and engage with people where they are. We failed to do that, and that's a big mistake. And finally, we have to have a real conversation about our access to high-speed and broadband services. We need to really look at the possibilities of making these into utilities. It's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Just as you have heat and hot water, not having access to high-speed broadband and internet services will impact drastically on your quality of life, from education to telemedicine to being able to even access and sign up for a vaccination site. And so the build out of high-speed broadband is something that we must fast track and do it in real time.
Thank you. So we share your perspective that the next leader of our city should unite our city and create common cause and look to get everyone to help those who most need it and keep us economically strong. I guess the question I have is, how hard is it now to do both things? How hard is it now to be sort of supportive of the business community and really give the economic help to those who need it? In the sense of this administration is like you chose one or the other, and I'd say, how does that work both economically, whether it's from a tax perspective of others, and how does that work kind of like spiritually in terms of uniting everybody?
Well, I think the best example of that, when I talk about a unifier, it's over 35 years of committed service. I think about during the days of the Black Lives Matters March and having business leaders call me and tell me that they was destroying their businesses on Fifth Avenue, many of the marches. And when I reached out to the Police Commissioner Dermot Shea, he told me to call the anti-terrorist czar, John Miller. I reached out to John Miller, and John shared with me that there was an anarchist group in the city, and their goal was not to march for police reform. Their goal was to burn down the city. And I immediately communicated with some of the organizers of the marches that were taking place out of Brooklyn. I had them receive instructions from my anti-terrorist ex-police officers who were retired, and they went in and started policing their own marches. And they were able to remove those anarchists that came from outside our city and was attempting to destroy our city, and they were able to peacefully march. And I always share that story because that's what a unifier is. I spent my last 35 plus years in government developing relationships with not only the executives in corporate America that are your ABNY members or the business owners on Fifth Avenue, but also the young men and women in NYCHA. I meet with gang members and talk about decreasing gang violence. I speak with young people who are in South Jamaica, Queens, or Brownsville, the South Bronx. When you have that credibility as a credible messenger, you're able to have people sit around the table and understand how we are in this together. That is what we need. Some folks have hijacked our narrative, believing that New Yorkers don't care for each other. That's untrue. And as the mayor, I'm going to be intentional about bringing my corporate CEOs into those communities to have things such as internship programs where young people could be exposed. It's about bringing us together to move this city forward.
Thank you. And can I ask, just from a revenue perspective for the city, do we have enough revenue? Do you feel like, is there a need for sort of a different path in that regard?
Explain that more to me. I didn't understand.
Do we have the money to do it? You talk about, obviously it's been a hard economic time for the city. You talk about efficiencies and waste. Do you think we also have to raise taxes to do it, or can we do it in the existing model at the moment?
Well, it's a combination. As you know, we're fortunate to have Schumer, the head of the Senate. He has clearly looked out for New Yorkers. We have also other prominent Congress men and women who are going to be advocating for our city. It looks like we will receive about $5 billion in economic stimulus. But I say, let's move like we don't have that money. I laid out a 5% cut across all of our city agencies, as well as we need to build out our city and improve on our tax base. But most importantly, we must stop causing the crises. And I need New Yorkers to understand that taxpayers are doing their job. Government is not doing its job. And I always point to the example of how do we have two agencies in conflict with each other, such as the Department of Health and Department of Education. One fights childhood obesity, childhood asthma, childhood diabetes by spending millions of dollars, and the other feeds our children 960,000 meals a day. And those meals cause childhood obesity, diabetes, and asthma. We feed crises. Why are we feeding New Yorkers who are in need food that will cause chronic diseases? And so it's imperative that we have a government that's functioning. We should not have a Department of Buildings that produces so many stop work orders to stop placing a shovel in the ground, or it's taking a year to 2 years to give a restaurant a license to open so they can hire low-skilled employees to pay into our tax base. And so, yes, I think we could manage the city to be more effective and use taxpayers' dollars better. Look at the police department. We spend about $400,000 in overtime. Why aren't we using technology so officers are not sitting in court waiting to testify? Why can't they use Zoom like we're using here? Or civilianizing our department, which is cheaper to have civilians do the job that we are having police officers do now, instead of being on patrol or where they should be, and decrease headcount without decreasing the patrol count. And so we could find the money in our city agencies, in our city budget. There is fat there, and we can do a better job of using taxpayers' dollars.
So thank you. Can I ask? Obviously, our Abbey community is very deeply close and a lover of politics. So I can't resist asking the question of what's your path? Like, how do you win this election?
Well, we are very excited on how we're going to move forward. Number one, I come from the borough of Brooklyn. Everyone knows the numbers there is one of the highest voting blocks. My popularity and the knowledge of what I have done in the borough is known by many of the voters. Second, I'm a child of two boroughs. I was raised in Queens. I was born in Brownsville, but I was raised in Queens. And so when you look at the fact, Queens is the second largest borough in our city, particularly Southeast Queens, where you receive 40% of the vote comes from out of Queens, comes from Southeast Queens. My mother still lives there. That's where I grew up. I'm going to do extremely well there. And we're going to do well in other parts of the city. When you look at it, the polls clearly show that I am one of the top candidates in the race. And most importantly, as much as I was hoping we can get money out of politics, as you know, I'm the only candidate that stated we should have a 100% campaign finance system. But we have been extremely successful in raising the money that's needed to go up on air and get our message out. We've outraised the entire field with $8.6 million, but we are also fiscally responsible. We still have about $8.3 million still on hand, so we will be ready for the race. We received an important endorsement this week from HTC, the Hotel Workers Union. That's extremely important. We have over 700 volunteers every week. Anywhere from 1 to 200 are on our organizing Zoom calls. The message resonates. But I think what is really telling is when a reporter called and stated, Eric, look at your donor list. Yes, you have the most money and one of the largest number of donors, but look at the last names. You have more African Americans, Caribbeans, people from the Jewish community, Chinese, Korean, all different groups. I'm the United Nations candidate. My message resonates all across this city because my voter gets up every morning, pulls the gate up in front of his or her shop, puts in 12, 13 hours, and they want to eke out a living for the future of their families and their children. They don't want to disband their police department. They just want their police department to do their job. They want their Department of Sanitation to keep the streets clean, and they want their children educated. We live in a city with 65% of Black children don't meet proficiency every year. They don't want to see that. And I believe when you bring the message together with my 35 plus years in service, you see that I'm ready to lead this city. And so many New Yorkers are sharing that same belief. And we believe that's our pathway.
You talk about being ready and the pathway. So let's say it happens, right? Are you ready for what 2022 is going to offer? What does the beginning of an Adams administration look like in our city?
Yes.
Like what, top of the list.
Yes, we are ready. As I stated, for the last 2.5 years, we've met with over 250 smart people in the city, former deputy mayors, former commissioners, leaders of industries and agencies all across this entire country. And so I already know who my police commissioner is going to be. Already know.
Will you tell us?
Oh, come on, you can't do that.
That's right.
I know who my chancellor.
Melvin Miller is busy.
I know who my chancellor is going to be. I know who my first deputy mayor is going to be. And we're looking at other agencies. Remember this city. This is a city where you can wake up and walk into City Hall and learn that a plane has flown into a building or that a plane has crashed on the Hudson River and landed. You could have a Black Lives Matter march, or you can have terrorists that attack our city. The uncertainty is daily. I'm the only one in this race that has lived that uncertainty for 22 years and had to respond. Every day I walked into that precinct and commanded my troops, I did not know what I was expecting, but I had to respond no matter what it was. And those are the skills that are needed. People say competency is on the ballot, but I believe also character is on the ballot. And when you look at the totality of a person's life and you look at how I want to bring the city forward, we'll be ready to lead day one. And so what does that look like? One, we must get crime under control. I will immediately reinstitute the anti-crime unit and turn it into an anti-gun unit. And we will use the precision policing model to go after those who are carrying guns. We know who the shooters are in this city. We must get gun violence under control or we will lose our tourism and no one is going to open a business in a city that is unsafe. Second, we will deal with the COVID crisis by doing rapid testing and give clear direction to our businesses on how to open safely. The state and city cannot leave the lack of clarity as a reason for keeping businesses closed, to look at frivolous lawsuits for anyone who catch coronavirus. If we have clarity, we can give people the safety that they need to know that businesses can open and get back to work. New York must get back to work. We must get our business travelers here for the restaurant industry, our hotel industry, our tourism. It is crucial that we do so. Third, we have to put in place real relief for our small businesses, to use the incoming PPE stimulus dollars to go on the ground and get these small businesses back up and running so that they can continue to hire and ensure that we can have those low-income New Yorkers find a pathway forward. But we need to do it with a government that's sound. So 3 things my commissioners would do right away. 1, they're going to clearly identify their mission. 2, they're going to make sure their mission ties into the overall mission of the city. And 3, which is most important, they're going to make sure that they do not carry out an action in their agency that is in conflict with the mission of another agency. We do that every day. And that must stop if we're going to run this city in the manner that a 21st century city should be run.
And sort of go deeper on the question of safety and the PD. You have such a unique history and experience as it relates, obviously, to being an officer and obviously what happened to you as a young man in a precinct. A lot of us, I'd say, look in and say, the challenge of policing to give people safety and policing with respect for all people seems to be a goal that we have not been able to achieve as well as we have wanted to. And I guess the question I have is why is that so hard? And 2, how can you get us there? How can you, because it seems to be the linchpin of so many things that have to do with dignity for people, right? And the future of our city.
So true, and you are correct. And it's trust. There's a lack of trust on both sides. And we need to rebuild that trust. Because it's not just the Floyd incidents. It's not just the Eric Gardner incidents. It's the daily disrespect. It's the daily lack of interactions. It is one of the best stories I could equate it to. I remember as a lieutenant taking a young rookie officer into a NYC development. And there was urine in the elevator. And the young officer stated, "You see, Lieutenant, these people don't deserve anything. They urinate in their elevators. They don't care about where they live." And I looked at that officer and I told him, one person urinated in that elevator. Everyone in this building is upset about that. But if you define a community based on a numerical minority that is of a criminal element, then you start the process of treating that entire community that way. Remember, police officers don't come to a home because they were invited to a birthday party. They respond when the party became disorderly or disruptive. And so when that's all you do, You live through this thing called vicarious trauma, and you begin to identify the residents of the city by the negative people you come in contact with. We must change that. Number one, we must diversify our police department. Too many people in our police department, over 30%, reside outside our city. That has to change. I would promote our peace officers who are school safety agents, traffic enforcement agents, hospital police, and other peace officers. In 2 years, I'll promote them to the police department. Why is that important? Because they are over 80% Black, Brown, and South Asian, 100% New Yorkers. A substantial number of them are women. We'll start to diversify our department, and it will look like New York City. Second, I will go further than what the mayor did about choosing precinct commanders. He took part of the idea that I gave him, but I would give veto power to local community leaders, clergy, civic groups, block association, youth groups. They will interview the precinct commander, find out his vision and determination, and then they will use the new 50A law to look at his past to see if he's a fit. Then the precinct commanders will have a different relationship with the communities that they are in and know that they're there because the community wants them. And I will go on a massive recruitment campaign to my historical Black colleges, to my fraternities, sororities, my religious institutions. We must diversify the police department and have these entities recruit young people of color, young people to be part of the police department of different ethnic and cultural groups, so our police department can be reflective of the city that we're in. And then we will start the process of rebuilding trust and changing the ecosystem of public safety, not to be just reactive, but to be proactive.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for about 2 more questions. I'm going to ask about NYCHA since you brought it up in terms of going into that elevator. I just said, can you talk to me about your plans? It feels like NYCHA has so failed the people who live there, and that we need a new path, and failed on such a dramatic level. How do you change that?
Honesty is so important. And everyone that comes in front of your group, they're going to talk about waiting for the federal government money to come in. Listen, folks, the bugles you hear, that is not the cavalry, that's taps. NYCHA is dying. And my mom used to say to me all the time, boy, you better have a plan B. And so what I say, let's continue to push the federal government. Let's have real conversations for reinvestment into public housing. But what can we do now? Number one, we could sell the air rights of NYCHA. It is predicted that it is going to produce about $8 billion in economic revenue. And this would allow us to go in and do some of the much needed repairs. But also we need to repair the spirit and trust of NYCHA. Many NYCHA residents just don't have faith in the system, and rightfully so. They've been lied to so many times. As mayor, we will allow them to have their own attorney that they interview and they decide on, not a city attorney, but a private attorney, to navigate all of these proposals, such as RAD and infill building, and all of these proposals so they can have the trust that they're getting the right information. When I purchased a home, I had an attorney beside me to help me navigate the complicated process. We need the same thing of our NYCHA residents. And then we need to be creative in our thoughts. If the community believes in the plan, let's move forward with it, such as infill building. But instead of having new people move into the infill building, let's have the existing tenants move into the new apartments so they can downsize. You have many NYCHA residents that don't want to downsize because they would be displaced to other communities instead of where they have lived for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. But if you allow them to stay where they are, those 3-bedroom apartments can downsize to a 1-bedroom apartment, and you will free up other NYCHA residents at the same time. Lastly, we need a NYCHA stat. It's too antiquated in the system. We're hemorrhaging money. we're not following the dollars, we can place QR codes on every building to identify the repairs that are needed. We can take down the scaffolding if we just use drones to inspect buildings in real time to determine what roofs must be repaired, instead of leaving drones up for 20, 30 years and spending $11 million a year on them. We need to modernize a real-time system of using NYCHA, and I call it NYCHA Stat, and it's something that we must introduce into the entire NYCHA system.
Thank you. I got one last question for you. Vaccinations. What do you say to communities who are hesitant at this time from getting a vaccine, and how important do you think that is to us coming back?
It's crucial. And what we must do is, anytime you want to complete an initiative, you have to fully understand what complexities or barriers are in the way to prevent it from happening. Our city did not do that. We knew long before the vaccines came to the city that there were some historical concerns in particularly the African-American community. So what we should have done, we should have deployed credible messengers early. Our clergy groups, the fraternities, the sororities, some of the civic groups. We should have already been on the ground with an educational plan of what it means to take the vaccine. We did not do that. We continue to operate in crisis mode only. How do you give out 900 vaccines and all of a sudden learn that you were not vaccinating the diversity of this city and you were not reaching herd immunity throughout this entire city? We gave the city a 7-point plan. Several city council members and borough presidents signed onto the plans, and state lawmakers. We showed them how to do it correctly, particularly in real time. We had people being vaccinated and they were filling out forms when we could have easily used handheld devices, received a daily update on where the vaccines were going, so we would not have 25% of our vaccines going outside our city, and we would have been able to adjust in real time to make sure we were reaching our goals. You can't continue to use these antiquated methods to run a modern city. I would say that over and over again, because it's time to move our city into a real-time city, because that is where cities are going to have to go to function into the future.
Mr. Borough President, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. We want to make as informed decision as possible. And I want to say thank you for giving us the time, but really, thank you for the public servant and the wonderful leader you've been for our city. We are grateful for that. And we look forward to more in the future with you. So
thank you very much. And to all your members, thank you. Take care.